growing up late 70s, going into the early 80s, prime time for the satanic panic. Horror was just not a thing that was allowed to happen in the house. But what would get by, things like Universal Monsters, they got through, and I got to see this thing that really resonates with me. I still have a deep, abiding love for the Universal Monsters. Hi, I'm Ruby Tombsday. I'm the host of the Ruby Tombsday Horror Show. I'm currently living in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, originally from South Texas. I do a weekly horror show that I host live on Scener, and not any movies in particular. It's kind of what's available on streaming, what I find fascinating, what's going to lend itself towards a live conversation, riffing, and a lot to talk about and things to interact with the audience on, etc. Spent everything from the 1922 Nosferatu straight through to opening night stuff. We got to do Jacob's Wife the night it broke. The most recent Texas Chainsaw movie, we got to do that the night it broke. I want to make sure that it's fun. At the same time, I don't want to be a carbon copy of all of the other riff shows that are out there, the Riff Tracks gangs, Cinematic Titanic, MST3K, of course, any of these. One, that's not fair to them. They're better at being them than I will ever be. So I also want to give the audience something that they're not normally going to find in any other show. While I still venerate the riff classics and I venerate the original horror hosts that inspired me, like Elvira and Svengoolie and Goulardi and Zachary, I don't want to be any of them. So one of the things that I love to do during my show that is less common in a lot of other shows is I like giving deep dives about not just like the production and the actors and their histories and the filmographies, this kind of thing. I like doing a lot of information about the history of this is what the lore is behind this kind of monster. And this is the occult significance of this kind of thing in the show, and relate it to not just storytelling practices. Kurt Siodmak basically creating what we know as werewolf lore now, and creating the rules of how vampires work and things like this. Then go into, here is where these things relate prior to Hollywood. Here's the actual folklore behind these things, and go into occult histories and even modern occult practices. That's something I always wish we would see more in horror hosting. So that's one of the things that I not only love to do, but want to bring to that art form as well, if I can. As Ruby Tombsday, I am a flesh golem and evil toy maker. I have an absolute deep-seated love for that particular type of monster. The flesh construct, the bits and bots put together, held together by string and a whole lot of electricity. Hence the stitches, this kind of thing. And a lot of that is I'm always of two minds about just about everything. Taking standardized testings when they were trying to figure out what the hell to do with me in school, I have a nasty tendency of coming right down the middle, 50% on everything. So it's really hard to fill any one thing for me. So being a living conglomeration kind of works. The Tombsday Toy Shop, it started off just as the setting for the character for the show. I've always been a maker since I was a little kid. So like Christmas one year, my parents asked me, so what do you want most for Christmas? And I said, I want Dixie cups, bendy straws, and double-sided Scotch tape. I got other things too, but these are the things I wanted. My mom made a deal with a local thrift shop. Like, it wasn't a Salvation Army, but it was like a Goodwill or something like that. Because they would just have the bins, like the wind-up plastic toys, the cheap dollar toys that were constantly getting broken because kids would come and mess around with them, break them, leave them there, and they would just throw them out. And my mom said, hey, look, put them all in a box. Once a month I'll come by, give you a couple bucks for the box full of broken toys. And I would part them all out and build things. So I was actually taking motors out of toys, putting them in things I would build out of Lego, and motorizing my toys, things like this. And that stuck. So I've always loved tinkering. Especially if it's got a motor in it or it makes a sound, I want it. So what I'm going to be doing is building toys out of all these bits and bobs, and some of them will be set pieces. Some of them will probably become characters in the show. I relate to broken toys. I will see a broken toy sitting on a shelf at the store, and that's the one that I want to take home. We were at a Barnes & Noble in San Antonio, Texas. We found the 10-inch glow-in-the-dark Ursula sitting there with like an inch of dust on the top because nobody wanted to buy it because her trident was broken. It had obviously been sitting there completely unloved. I took it home, glued the thing back together, wrapped it with glow-in-the-dark floss, and it ended up improving the model of the toy. And now she's got this big prominent place on my mantle because I'm going to adopt the broken toys. Me and horror in my younger days unfortunately was kind of a covert situation, but we would catch the occasional monster vision and things like this that Joe Bob would do back in the day, kind of on the sly when the parents weren't looking, that kind of thing. But when he came back for that original marathon, we were there for that. So we've been involved since day one, since the last drive-in just came back as a marathon, all the way through up to current. Jeff and I go back to my very beginning days at Stream Lounge when I started doing the show back in 2018. I'm on his Stabby Road album on the Final Girl track. I'm in 2 or 3 of his videos, a couple just as cameo shots, and of course one, singing for Final Girl. So we've been fast friends for ages. So it was great to finally get a chance to meet Jeff Whitmire. I got really lucky finding the online horror community when we did. We've been literally moments away from homelessness multiple times, dealing with things like just mental health issues and physical health issues and things like this. One thing you can count on is you can just make a random post at any given point, say, hey, look, I'm in a really bad way today. I need somebody to talk to. And you're going to have 10 of them, 24 hours a day. Somebody's going to be there for you to talk to. They really do just accept so openly and so readily and legitimately want to give that ear, that help, that support in any way they can. It's human nature to have cliquishness and want to gatekeep and all these things. And while that certainly exists in the horror community, it is so much smaller a percentage, I find, than it is in so many other fandom cultures and what have you. Oh, Monster Mania, that was an absolute blast. Straight out of the gate, it is a great horror convention. And while Monster Mania Con isn't quite as big, it is a fantastic group of people. And they had fantastic panels, and the vendors are amazing, and photo ops and like this. Really, really cool place to be. We stumbled into, believe it or not, a panel with Eli Roth. Oh, we need a place to sit down. Hey, look, there's some seats over. Oh, wow, it's Eli Roth is on stage talking to us about saving the sharks. This is fantastic. But then on top of that, there was the opportunity, like I said, we did the Pennsylvania Mini Mutant meetups. Everybody was just happy to see everybody else. It was a great time. Everybody was positive. Everybody was having fun. So it was a great group of folks. We got to take all kinds of pictures together. It was the first time that I was able to go to a horror convention as Ruby. So that was a big deal for me too. Growing up late 70s, going into the early 80s, prime time for the satanic panic. Horror was just not a thing that was allowed to happen in the house. Mom came from a Mormon background. My dad was Roman Catholic. I mean, altar boy, planning on going into the seminary, probably from a good place, but they bought very heavily into the anti-horror, anti-Satanism propaganda stuff that was so popular at that time frame. Horror movies were considered, using their words, not mine, to be glorifying Satan. But what would get by would be things like Universal Monsters. Apparently, if it was black and white, it was okay. I still have a deep, abiding love for the Universal Monsters. I can't say that I love them just because this is what was allowed. I love them because they got through, and I got to see this thing that really resonates with me. And all like the Abbott and Costello Meet the Wolfman and all of these kinds of things. If there was humor, it was generally okay. Occasionally, like a Hammer movie would slip through the cracks. Getting into my teen years, I worked at a video department in a grocery store, Super S Foods. The grocery store was run by a Southern Baptist family. So the fact that we had so many trauma movies sitting on the shelves still boggles my mind. We had like 3 Toxic Avengers and at least 2 of the class of Nukem High. I would engage all of the people, all the horror fans that came in to rent their movies. So I would ask them about them and just mine them for information. Grandpa from the original Munsters, he was a horror host for a while, in character as Grandpa from the Munsters. And on USA on Saturday afternoons, he would host movies. So I got to see little things that would sneak through like that, the occasional Elvira on the sly. All of that background, all those old movies where, everything started and then going out and finding everything else too, it really helped give me a very broad scope in my horror education. But what I started realizing just in the last few years is that all of this time, my dad, who was the loudest one about, no, we can't have this, and rah, 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 anti-horror, 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 movies are the devil, was all performative. He didn't buy into that whole line of thinking at all, but he wanted to show solidarity with my mom, and he's a little afraid of her. Now he's coming to me and saying, hey, I just watched Stuff Stephanie in the Incinerator. Or whatever this is. One of the things I love about this movie is the fact that, and you see this in a lot of like late 40s, early 50s era sci-fi and monster movies, you get to see women in careers that they generally weren't allowed to hold. So you see scientists, and you see authors, you see investigators, you see all of these jobs that women generally didn't get the opportunities to do. And you see them treated in these movies, for the most part, as peers. You see Julie Adams there as an ichthyologist. So she's there because she studies marine life. She has a reason to be on the cast other than just being a love interest, which of course she is as well. But, you know, that's not why she's on the expedition. And one of the things that I like talking about the most when it comes to Creature of the Black Lagoon is Millicent Patrick. Millicent Patrick is the artist who is responsible for creating the look of the Gillman as we know them. And the tragedy of this is that she is not credited. The credit goes to Bud Westmore. He and the studio thought that it was way too bad an idea for them to let the public know that a woman designed the monster. So they gave all of the credit to Bud Westmore, just so they would have a man in the credits next to the name for the design. If it wasn't for the fact that there were a couple of stills shot before that decision was made of her actually at her art desk drawing the original sketches for the Gillman, we would have no idea that Millicent Patrick was actually the creative artist behind this iconic universal monster. She deserves to get credit for it. I really do feel that while picking the correct movies is important, or the correct media, I should say, because it may be TV shows, it may be books, what have you. But I think that some exposure to horror is not only okay, but I think it's important. And there have been some research papers now that have been issued on the topic where one of the benefits of horror is the fact that it is catharsis. And it is a safe way to be able to take a situation, teach kids what it's like to experience some form of fear in a safe way, and learn early on how to process that. So much of what we feel as fear is visceral and involuntary. And if we don't start developing the tools to process that early on, I feel that this leads to a lot of issues processing fear and anxiety and change and all of these things later on. Well, we spoke a little bit earlier about othering. There are horror movies out there, especially now, like the last 5-10 years, that confront what it's like to be trans, confront what it's like to be gay, or confront racial ideas and all of these things, and show them a way like, okay, here's to take these a way to take these scary topics, put them in a safe way to confront them, because it's on the other side of a screen, it's on a page, it's what have you. But look at how they handle things, look at how they process things, give them some kind of hope. And representation, of course, matters. Being able to see, hey, look, there's somebody out there going through what I'm going through is huge. It was a Trevor Project fundraiser weekend I did on Stream Lounge, and it was a weekend long. We did three running days straight of live horror hosted movies. I also hosted Poltergeist Night of the Chicken Dead with Lloyd Kaufman. He not only sponsored the whole event we did for that weekend and donated a bunch of money for us, but he actually donated a couple of screen use props for us to auction, to give away. And he came on and hosted the movie with us. Talk about a highlight of a career. It was three of us that night. It was me, Lloyd Kaufman, and Taxidermia. And that was an absolute riot. So much fun. A specific type of fae folk, wee folk. They're more towards the goblin side than fairy side. They are considered to be small, hideous, very, very monstrous, bloodthirsty type of creatures. They're typically called red caps because of their propensity to take off their pointed leather caps that they wear and dip them in the blood of their victims. They are most closely tied to the Northumbrian region of the British Isles. It's one of those creatures where you say goblin, and 9 times out of 10, what people picture in their head is actually a red cap. If you've seen the Shudder original Unwelcome, that is all about red caps, and it's one of my favorite movies. But you'll see them in RPGs. Almost all RPGs have red caps in them. The Bard's Tale trilogy has red caps in them. Pathfinder, a lot of their goblins are actually red caps. So if you do tabletop RPGs, you pull out your monster manual or whatever your compendium is for that particular game, you're probably going to find an entry for them somewhere in the book. Time and time again, people are getting exposure to these movies that they wouldn't get otherwise because studios don't look at them and see profit. We're starting to show that there are audiences for things like this. That's why All Hail Vinegar Syndrome and Arrow Video and all these places showing that, hey, look, there is an audience for this kind of stuff now. But movies like we were talking about before, Thomas Edison, Frankenstein, all these kinds of movies so many times would never find audiences if it wasn't for the horror hosts. People tune in for the schlock or the spectacle or the goofiness or what have you of a horror host, and then as a result of that, get exposed to all of these movies that they end up loving, and these movies get longevity and exposure and remain a part of history rather than being lost. This is what horror hosts do. We help keep these things in the historical record, and I don't take that lightly. Honestly, this continue, not just me have the fun doing it, but be a part of serving that cause and helping it continue. One of the things I'm dead set on doing eventually is a live in-person horror host event. Rent a small theater somewhere, up in front of the screen, live host a movie with an audience sitting there, and do that whole thing. If you saw Elvira's Mistress of the Dark, the movie that she did, where she does it in that little small town theater, just runs the midnight horror show for the kids, that's exactly what I want to do at least once. So I am determined to make this happen eventually. I don't know how. That's the goal, at least once, to get up and do that live in front of an audience. And just do what I can to help keep horror hosting alive as an art form. Svengoolie is celebrating his 45th year right now, longest continuously running horror host in history. A lot of our heroes have already passed on. A lot of them are going to be by necessity retiring. Cassandra Peterson, she just recently did her last Not Scary Farm event. She's not doing events as Elvira anymore. But I want to see the art form itself continue. So the more I can interest people across as broad a scope as I can in this kind of thing, then hopefully there'll be some other kid that has that bug, like, I want to do this someday. I've done 3 shows with co-hosts that were 10 years of age or under. And I love that because they get that bug and like, yeah, this is blessed. I want to do this. So there's some kind of hope for horror hosts down the line. With the possible exception of Lugosi's Dracula, we time and time again see very, very sympathetic monsters. And especially for a time when othering was such a huge part of American culture, it's really fascinating to see these things come out and in their very quiet ways speak out against that. You can't watch Frankenstein or Bride of Frankenstein without your heart sinking for Karloff. Bride, which is my all-time favorite horror movie ever, is Bride of Frankenstein. You look at her and nothing that is happening has anything to do with her consent. And none of it, nothing is going on. She's never confronted. She's never consulted. Like, not only created against her will, like Karloff's character was, but created against her will for the express purpose of being a mate for somebody else that she hasn't even met. So you're confronted with having to stare in the face what it was like to be a feminine presenting person in that time frame, the absolute powerlessness and the beauty of the fact that you get to see her rage against it. You get to see her say, no, this isn't okay. Speaking out against all of it. Through the confusion, there's that rage. I have to give credit to James Whale for not only being a brilliant director, but being an out gay man in Hollywood, purposely employing that into the storyline, not burying it hip deep in subtext, but making it a part of the story itself. The only thing that Karloff's portrayal of the monster wants is just to be accepted. He just wants to be a person like everybody else. That is the core to his tragedy. Wolfman, all he wants is the right to decide his healthcare. That's all that he really wants. He wants out of this curse. He doesn't want to be this person anymore. He never asked to be this person. He just wants it to be over. So a lot of the sequels are him trying to find a way to die on his own terms because he can't, because the curse keeps bringing him back. So time and time again, we see these characters that are supposed to be these representations of evil or marketed as representations of evil. And at the same time, it's at its core, people looking for basic human rights and human dignity. And I love that. And I think that's what makes them ageless, and that's what makes them timeless, is the fact that we're still looking for those things today, possibly more so than ever. But that gives us something to connect to, that gives us us that are in any way, shape, or form on the outside, something to look up on the screen and go, yeah, man, somebody gets it. We're not alone. That's beautiful.